Okay. So last week was the introduction, basically describing what the lab is. And just as a recap, we're going to be using Wednesdays as an opportunity to rotate between you guys and just give the lab in general an update on your progress. Traditionally, if you're starting off in the lab, this would be synonymous with the journal club. But as we progress further and further along with the research, we're going to actually be trying to incorporate real data that we're actually acquiring and analyzing in efforts to try to produce some type of manuscript. So today we're going to have Mr. Malcolm Lee present some of the research that he has been doing and the topic he's investigating about Alzheimer's disease. So since this is a general lab topic, are you guys there? Jamise and Tyshawn and Jim?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I'm cooking.
Yes, I'm here.
Bianca driving. All right, so today, without any further ado, I'm not going to slow up the talk. You guys can save any questions you might have for the end. I suggest that you do think about questions. This is a topic that can actually impact all of us at some point in our life if our brains start to have a different type of dysfunction. This actually is common with age, so I'm not going to take any more shine from Mr. Lee. So without any further ado.
Okay, I see you're still sharing.
You now have the ability to share.
Can y'all see my screen?
I can see a screen.
Yes,
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, we can
Cool,
see
cool.
If at all, if you have the opportunity, can you turn your camera on? And because this is really something that it's not class. We're actually talking amongst each other. So if you're working, I understand that. But all right, so go ahead, sir.
All right, cool. All right, well, how's it going, everybody? My name is Malcolm. I'm a new student here. I'm actually a transfer. Y'all haven't heard that on any of these live Zooms before. I'm excited to be going to Virginia Union and getting to know each of y'all this semester. And tonight I'm just going to share a little bit about what I've been learning about Alzheimer's since I've been working with Dr. Ruffin so far. So thank you, Dr. Ruffin, for the opportunity to do this. And without further ado, here we go. So of course, this is the Alzheimer's review. I'm going to be going through some of the current research and some things that are plausible theories for treatments. And I'm going to take you through the symptoms as well as the molecular cascades. Okay, so a lot of people think that these two terms are used interchangeably. That's actually a false statement. So dementia is describing a set of symptoms that are usually associated with cognitive decline. So that's a very general term that a lot of people think is used interchangeably with Alzheimer's. And the symptoms for this general term are just memory and reasoning loss and a host of other symptoms that we'll get into later. But Alzheimer's accounts for 60 to 80% of the dementia cases. I believe that Lewy bodies makes up 5 to 10% of the others, and the vascular dementia makes up the other 10 to 15%. So Alzheimer's is very prevalent today. This particular brand of dementia is what's a lot of people who are entering their late 60s up until they die are dealing with. And we'll get into the numbers associated with that a little bit later on. So like I alluded to a little bit earlier, the Lewy body dementia is a form of dementia. There's visual hallucinations, almost like schizophrenia. And then they have some movements like Parkinson's. And that means they've got kind of a shuffling walk. I'm not sure if you guys remember before he died, Muhammad Ali in the 2008 Olympics. And he was moving extremely slowly up to light the torch on the opening day of the games. It was almost hard to see that he was the champ just because his movements were so inhibited by the Parkinson's. But Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's are very closely related in terms of the symptoms and how they treat it. And then the last little bit of Lewy body dementia that it's notorious for is the alertness and attention being really low. Those people are said to demonstrate symptoms almost like ADHD, though some people debate whether that exists. You'll see that very short attention span in people with Lewy body dementia. Okay, so vascular dementia is the next one I was talking about. And this one is impaired memory, sure, but it also includes things like aphasia. It destroys your speech. Aphasia patients, they can read lips extremely well usually because they are unable to converse in conversation like you and I can. For the most part, they can, they can't really communicate. It sounds like Yoda's speech almost. Like it's very incoherent and they lose cognizance of the syntax and how sentences are supposed to be phrased. And it's just difficult to have conversations with them. They also lose their executive function. I mean, if I just wanted to get up and go get a book, that would take some planning on my part. They don't have that ability to plan out their day the way you and I can. And then they also have impaired social cues. So they're not able to function in the social environment anymore. Some people think that's a chicken or egg sort of thing where they're not exposed to as many people, but there are signs showing that the centers of the brain associated with pleasure being around people are inhibited there. So this one doesn't have as much of the delirium or hallucinations, but it is definitely a form of dementia that people are well aware of, scientists. So back to Alzheimer's disease. I just did that little prelude just to let you guys know of all the different forms of dementia that are plaguing the people of this generation. So AD is the 6th leading cause of death in Caucasians and the 4th among African Americans. So of course, we should be paying attention to that, of course. And like I said earlier, it's 60% of dementia cases, and it costs $226 billion in healthcare. So there's really a huge market for getting drugs created to combat this disease, if y'all know anything about the healthcare industry. And then the total annual person, or the amount per person it takes to treat them, is approaching almost $1 trillion by 2050. So this is a field that we should really care about, because $1 trillion, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with how much healthcare genuinely costs, but that's a ton. That's almost at the level of heart disease, how much is treated for that. So, of course, it's the most costly illness in the United States, more so than stroke, cancer, and heart disease combined. Okay, now so we can get into the pathology. So there are 3 consistent neuropathological hallmarks. And all these, if you check Alzheimer's patients, once they've deceased, or if you check their brains while they're still alive, you'll see amyloid-rich senile plaques. And we'll get into amyloid a little bit deeper, because in the amyloid hypothesis, people believe that this is the cause. These deposits are the primary cause of Alzheimer's. Then there's the neurofibrillary tangles. Those are just cellular proteins that just help transport nutrients across the cell, and those eventually turn on the patients as well. And both of these, the amyloid plaques and the neurofibrillary tangles, they lead to the neuronal degeneration, which inevitably causes the symptoms like the loss of memory, terrible moods, this decrease in overall quality of life that we see in Alzheimer's patients. I'm not sure if you guys have family members that have suffered from Alzheimer's, but I'm sure you can see a correlation between those symptoms like I did in my grandfather. And these changes don't happen all at once, so they might set in around 50 or 60 for some people, but then they don't take their toll on the body until maybe sometimes 5 to 10 years later. And that's when you see that they're not remembering their daughter's name, whereas they were just forgetting routes. But we'll get into the symptoms a little bit later. But first, I want to take a look at what I said a little bit earlier about in 2050, how the amount of cases are going to go up and the amount of money spent on Alzheimer's is going to go up. We are a society that's more and more glued to our phones. And the more we engage in that sort of mindlessness, it's harder for our synapses to connect with each other. It's just like being a human being. That level of isolation sinks you deeper into its quicksand. So this is something that either medically we need to fix, or we need to make more of a conscious effort to rewire our brains, connect with people who we wouldn't normally connect with, try to solve more puzzles, try to just work with our minds more. But as you can see, from 2020 to 2050, the number of cases will double. So that's for the symptoms. Of course, there's the life-disrupting memory loss. There's challenges in planning and solving problems, difficulty doing familiar tasks. Some of them even have issues where they can remember learning a particular task, but they don't remember being taught. So they don't have any episodic memory. That's what those are called. They're called episodes. Like if I were to talk to one of you guys, that would be an episode that's totally ingrained in my mind. So they can remember the actual action, more declarative memory, but they can't remember the episode of having learned it. And sometimes it goes a different way where they can't remember the semantics or the facts, but they remember having learned it, but they just can't recall what the answer might be, like forgetting the square root of 49 or something like that. And then they see the personality and mood shift, and then misplacing steps for routes that they know very well. So if you guys can see this, this is where the amyloid takes its toll. In the healthy neuron, you see how you've got the myelin sheath and you've got that nice, smooth synapse that's coded for a very fast, speedy connection between two cells. They can pass electronic energy very quickly. In Alzheimer's disease, you see those amyloid plaques, those yellow bushes there. They suffocate those synapses until they die. Now, neurons, just like I was saying earlier, like people, they need that connection in order to stay engaged. Otherwise, they'll shrivel away and they'll die. So those plaques, that's why they're considered to be the gun of Alzheimer's disease. But we'll later get to what's considered to be the bullet. I heard something on a YouTube video that said if amyloid beta is the gun, then tau is the bullet. So the two work in tandem to eat up our synapses. So the first stage is, of course, a normal brain. Then you get the age forgetfulness, and usually people aren't paying that much attention to it at that point because, you know, everyone forgets things. So unless you know people who are trained to understand how Alzheimer's works and when this decline usually would set in, it goes unchecked. Then you've got the mild cognitive impairment. That's usually forgetting the routes like we talked about. And then mild Alzheimer's sets in. And from this point forward, it's severe Alzheimer's disease. And usually at this point, people aren't dying from the Alzheimer's itself. It's usually from just being dwindled down into a shell of themselves where they don't even get up and live a normal life anymore. They usually die from bed sores or something associated with Alzheimer's disease, but not the neurodegenerative stuff itself. Mm-hmm. So if you look here at the APP protein, that's essential for Alzheimer's. So this is a protein that is responsible for, well, it's a gene actually that cuts the amyloid beta protein once it's done its job. Remember I was talking about how it's amyloid beta job. It's an intercellular protein that allows things to go in and out of the cell, just nutrients that the cell needs. So B secretase cuts the APP protein in a healthy neuron that's functioning properly. But on these ones at the bottom here, you see that amyloid beta 42 is a brand of that gene that's malignant in the cell. and unsoluble, it aggregates into the plaques. So usually the gene for the ones up top, they're soluble. So cerebrospinal fluid can wash it away, and then just the cell can disintegrate it fairly easily because there's no fatty acid surrounding it, and it's just easy to remove. But the alpha beta 42 is the one that's most commonly associated with Alzheimer's disease. If you can look up on the right-hand side, you can see the amyloid plaques. They're very large, and they can be seen with a CAT scan or a functional MRI. And that's just the tip of the genetic component. So to break down the molecular cascade a little bit further and expounding upon what I was already saying, if you take a look at that intracellular protein there, that first one is normal. It's doing its job, and that blue coil, which is a protein, is soluble. But unfortunately, that beta amyloid plaque, when that is sitting there on the beta amyloid in between the cell membrane, it causes the blockage. And APP is a very important gene. It modulates cell growth and stimulates neurite growth. That's how you get neurons to grow, and you can learn a host more new things. So we've talked about amyloid. We talked about the accumulation of amyloid beta and how that leads to destruction of your neurons, and the imbalance in the clearance, how vital that is. That clearance is what keeps your cells functioning. And once it starts to accumulate, those monomers, which are just singular proteins, they multiply. And just like in the previous slide, they're very large oligomers. So I hope you have a pretty sound foundation in amyloid. So now we're going to go to tau. So of course, tau is on the inside of the cell. You can take a look inside of there. They're very tiny little proteins that are inside the synapses. But unfortunately, these are converted into something called a neurofibrillary tangle. And these block cells from sending each other messages. And this is just a bit of a recap slide. So biomarkers are just ways markers that you can look at to see what the Alzheimer's is doing, where it's aggregating, and basically a telltale sign that it's there. So of course you can check the cerebral spinal fluid or the blood. Those are tried and true methods, but there's also neuroanatomical. As I said earlier, there's a CAT scan and a functional MRI you can look at. You can see the amyloid aggregating. You can also see the volume of the brain decreasing, as what's common with Alzheimer's patients. You can also look at PSEN1, PSEN2. These are genes that code for 1-persillin and persillin-2. And these are critical for the clipping of amyloid beta as well. So there are 3 different genes. I haven't talked about AP04 yet. I have my own slide on that, but they're usually looking for those 8 things to determine if someone has Alzheimer's or not. So a little bit deeper into the genetic component. Amyloid cascade hypothesis, I talked a little bit about that, but essentially it's that amyloid is the catalyst. And it's an increase in the alpha beta 42 ratio. But usually this starts to set in before the age of 65. EOD penetrance, that's critical. That's associated with early onset Alzheimer's. And the environmental and genetic factors increase the odds of getting Alzheimer's as well. So it's not quite a genetic thing or an environmental thing. It's almost like nurturing nature. If you have a predisposed genetic bias for Alzheimer's, and you had the APOE gene, and APP isn't getting cleaved just right, you're more susceptible. I remember reading that if you live on or born close to a major intersection, you're 3 times more likely to get Alzheimer's after 65. And the same is true if you have a mother or grandmother or father. So there are genetic factors as well as environmental things. Diet and drugs and alcohol also play a role, but those aren't as clear. So specifically on the chromosomes, you could find these genes on 1, 14, and 21. If you're familiar with Down syndrome, 21st chromosome is what's missing in Down syndrome. Apolipoprotein, E4 on chromosome 19 is also critical, as I was saying earlier. And that's more so the case for the late onset. And it's APO4 that people have more closely associated with late onset. But APO2 is also one that people are evaluating for its potential, but it's been ruled out as being as detrimental as APO4. So as for risk factors, we touched on this a little bit earlier. Of course, Down syndrome is one, family history, but also chronic high blood pressure. And gender, women are 3 times more likely to get it than men, as well as smoking and drinking and a severe head injury. So concussions, any sort of contusion where the brain jostles, you're more likely. So this is really interesting. This is some new research. It's happening at Johns Hopkins right now. And essentially they're saying that pH is significantly higher. Lower, more acidic in the Alzheimer's mice. So you know about pH, you know about hydronium ions, they pull protons off of things. And if you look at the pH scale, of course, 0 over here, that's your hydroiodidic, hydrobromic acid, hydrochloric, and then on this side, you've got, ammonium. So they found that the average for this region being a little bit closer to water, 6.21. The Alzheimer's mice were closer to 5.37. Of course, there's more research that needs to go into determining why that's the case. But the acidic endosomes cause plaque buildups in their most recent study. So they're hoping to use these as treatments in the future, preventing pH from lowering to an acidic level where proteins can no longer function properly. Okay, cool. So Namenda, that's a very popular treatment right now because it gives you your core cognition back, your memory, and your mood. So memory and mood are really big in this field. Cognex is very important for memory and mood, and they both treat the same neurotransmitter systems. So they're all cholinesterase inhibitors. So they inhibit acetylcholine, and that's giving people positive results. But these treatments are not cures, and they're not as effective as their creators would like them to be at this point in time. So of course, they're going to be doing more research to evaluate the potential they have in the future, but also why they're not working on as many patients as they'd like. Of course, all of these are prescribed. And then Rimonol, that's another acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. Acetylcholine is a very popular system to treat for Alzheimer's disease because it's so important for learning and memory. And so is the neurotransmitter glutamate, just that you know. All right, so we also have some other methods. Lumosity.com, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, that's a brain training software. And they speed up your processing speed, your working memory, your mental flexibility. And they're also really fun to play. And they're backed by neuroscience, and their creators have said that they can delay the effects of Alzheimer's and help to break down some of those AB42 molecules that are choking your synapses. And then, of course, physical activity and a great diet is critical. So in essence, Alzheimer's is truly an interesting but difficult disease to treat. And it has an effect on your overall quality of life. And that's why the maximum that these drugs can offer is giving people their quality of life back, of course, while allowing them to, function within the family environment without forgetting too many things and just be happy, But most of the time, these treatments need to be, especially the medical or pharmacological ones, need to be coupled with something that's, of course, just good for your health in general, like the working out, like the brain training, like the continuing education, and continuing to be social until your old age. And community resources need to be available to allow patients, families, and caregivers the resources that they need for not just early detection, but management of their symptoms once they realize the Alzheimer's onset. So that's what I've been learning, and I appreciate you guys' attentiveness today. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know, and I look forward to hearing from you guys now. Thank you.
Great talk. It looks like Zoom is going to try to reset in about 7 minutes. So we can start with questions now, and if we actually end up getting cut off, we can restart the meeting again. But great presentation, Malcolm. Thank you. Any questions about Alzheimer's?
That was a really good presentation. I do have one question. Can you?
I'm sorry, I was just wondering if I'm sideways.
Oh. Can you? Is it possible to pull the slide back up?
Oh yeah, sure.
Can you go back to the Thai proteins?
Trying to share, but nothing is happening yet.
No. Well, wow, as it's loading, with the Thai proteins, I missed the part on like how it can like why it's so important, like the Thai proteins, why it's so important, what they do with Alzheimer's. Can you explain that again?
You need my money. I never needed your money. Just the only thing you ever did. Goodbye.
What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna restart the meeting, everybody, since
Okay.
Okay.